Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's Ukraine War news update for the 8th of July 2023. Sorry, my brain is just mush today if I don't make any sense. My two 13-year-old or 12-year-old, almost 13, twin boys had a sleepover last night with a couple of mates here. I've had very little sleep. If anyone wants some free twin boys, just, fill out the application. It's not a problem. Anyway, let's go to where we usually start, which is Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Here we have a fairly average day across the board, I would say. Difficult to say average. It's kind of really dismissive word, isn't it, for in terms of real people. These statistics translate to real people. 630 liquidated personnel, 4 tanks, 9 armored personnel vehicles, 16 artillery systems, 3 MLRS. That's all there or thereabouts. 16 artillery systems and 3 MLRS is still a high number. It's just lower than it's previously been for much of the last really 2 months. To say that 16 losses in a day is low is quite incredible. I mean, they're just getting hammered on that front. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. There's news actually in S-400. In fact, one that sent a missile against Kramatorsk, maybe the one that sent a missile against a pizzeria that killed those civilians might have been taken out. So that's a really high value target if that is the case. 14 drones, 16 vehicles and fuel tanks, 7 pieces of special equipment, so still fairly high there. 16 vehicles will be vehicles that are providing ammunition and supplies to the front line, special equipment, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, electronic warfare, that kind of stuff. So 7 being lost in a day when the average is under 2 per day for the whole of the war. That is a significant number there. But, it's a good day really for the Ukrainians, just not as good as it has been previously. Let's see if there's anything we can say about those losses. Well, lots more montage, bits of footage there. You can see a supply truck being taken out with a big boom. This is a Special Forces TSSOA of the Security Service of Ukraine, successfully destroying equipment and personnel of the enemy. The list of the enemy losses was 2 tanks, 2 Akatsiya self-propelled guns, 3 Giatsint B guns, 2 armored cars, Pol 21 electronic warfare station, video surveillance camera, 25 cars, 3 firing positions, 13 enemy fortifications, and 1 ammunition depot, and 72 occupiers abruptly dropped out of the chat. In addition, together with the artillerymen of the armed forces of Ukraine, 2 grads, 2 units of special equipment, 6 warehouses, and another 55 invaders were hit. So, what the point of saying all that is that there are just consistent hits on a daily basis, quite often using first person view drones. These are becoming really the munition of choice for just taking out. So when we go to look at these figures here, it'd be interesting to know what percentage of all of these vehicles and systems and whatnot are taken out by first person view drones with those 2.5 kilogram RPG-7 warheads. They're just becoming a real problem for the Russians. Yes, the Russians do have sort of vague equivalents to those and are using first-person view drones themselves, but just not on the scale I think the Ukrainians use them. That attrition is taking place. And I think we're just seeing a period now of extended attrition on the front lines, and it's certainly got slower. I was listening to Andrew Perpetua's live stream, a mapper that I hold in high regard, saying yesterday that as far as he's concerned, it has slowed down in the last week. The reasons for that are going to be speculative, but it could be an operational pause. It could just be it's grindingly difficult. It could just be that they are concentrating more on taking out these positions behind the lines in the sort of way that you see in these montage videos for an extended period. The S-400 complex I was just mentioning, which was reportedly used to attack Kramatorsk last week, is said to be destroyed. During a recent attack on the city, 13 people died and over 60 were wounded. That is fantastic news if that has happened. That's a really high value system, the S-400. It is like an upgraded S-300, which is high value in itself. So, and the claim is that and this is Hanna Maliar, the deputy defense minister, the Russians are losing 5.3 times as many troops as the Ukrainians are losing. And if that is true, and even if it's like nearly true, this would represent an advantage to the Ukrainians. So keep doing what they're doing now, which is not really committing themselves to large offensives. So this counter-offensive. I mean, if you could say, right, you're going to do a counter-offensive and you are going to kill 5 to 6 times as many troops as they're going to take of yours, and you're on the offensive, you would take that. You'd be like, yeah, brilliant. And then if the next part of that was, yeah, but you're not really going to attack, you're just going to send a load of drones and Storm Shadows and HIMARS, you'd be like, well, fair enough. If it's functionally doing what we want to do, which is trick the Russian forces to a point where eventually it will be comparatively easy to attack and to take territory. So essentially, you want to take territory right at the end of the day, but in order to take territory the easiest, you would like there to be no troops and no pieces of mechanized equipment. So this kind of period now of like, oh, it's going really slowly. If it's still resulting in those attrition ratios, then this is great for the Ukrainians. And the question is, and what pro-Russian shills will say is, well, actually, is that number correct? And actually, not just pro-Russian, but my question is that number correct? You know, is it 1 to 5.3? Is that accurate? Um, but anyway, we'll carry on. We'll look at some strikes. So 5 Shahed drones were shot down, but some did get through. Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovohrad regions did see some Shahed drones. So during the night, the Russians shelled Kryvyi Rih with drones and hit the agricultural enterprise. Reports ahead of Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. The 26-year-old man was injured, hospitalized in moderate state. Two fires at once, 360 square meters, several warehouses were destroyed. You don't know whether that, says agricultural enterprise. Was that warehouse, those warehouses, were they storing military equipment, so on and so forth. So, what Ukraine say will be putting positive spin on this, in the same way that the Russians do this. So we just need to be aware that there might be some serious damage to Ukrainian military capacity, or there might not. Who knows? The Voronezh, which is Russian region, there were drones sighted, apparently going towards an oil storage facility in the city. One downed drone fell on the roof of a tank, and they claim there was no damage. So Russians here claiming nothing to see type thing. Whether anything here, I don't know. There's no footage of anything going off. There is footage of a Russian ammo depot on fire in Luhansk, about 125 kilometers from the front line. So possibly Storm Shadow. There's quite a significant fire. As a result, there's quite a bit of footage going around concerning this strike. So that's fairly significant, and that could, have knock-on ramifications for ammunition supply to Russian troops in Luhansk. Fires in Belgorod. Belgorod is a Russian oblast just north of Ukraine. Russian news is saying locals report that fires are burning in several places in Shebekino. So this is where they attacked the kind of Russian volunteer corps, and those two units attacking up there. Well, I'm sure I saw somewhere that there were grad strikes on Shebekino, so that could be as a result of grad strikes. Right, moving on to other things. So somewhat quieter, I guess, on the strikes and hits and losses front. To other bits and pieces here. Russia has attempted to control everything in Syria, says someone. That is not exactly pertaining to Ukraine, but it's interesting to see the kind of insidious nature of Russia and their tentacles of uh, power and, I guess, cultural control of nations they're involved in. Uh, Russia is attempting to control everything in Syria. They are trying to alter the Syrian composition by naturalizing many Russians and granting them Syrian citizenship. They falsified the data of 5 Russian women to play for the Syrian national team in the Arab Games in Algeria. This is a crime. Russia is attempting to erase our history, says clearly a Syrian. Russia does whatever they want in Syria with the approval of the criminal Bashar al-Assad, Putin's spoiled child. Putin and Assad are war criminals. And then, further information on this, 5 Russians now representing Syria in the Arab Games that don't particularly look Syrian and have particularly Russian names. But there you go. Something to think about. Well, that's a sign of how cowed the Russian Navy is. Zelensky visits Snake Island. This is incredible in daylight, brave and also a real slap in the face of Russian power. This is quite significant. Actually, a lot of people are talking about how this is quite a move for Zelensky.
Українських героїв,
And
усіх воїнів, які билися за цей острів, які звільнили його.
And the sort of things he was saying and stuff he was doing, as I've seen, no reports are saying goosebumps as far as he's concerned. You know, this guy is just doing a tremendous job of leading Ukraine. I mean, goodness, he's looking a little more haggard than he did a year and a half ago. This is day 500 of the war, by the way, so it's a fairly significant day. But this guy gets around. Man, are you sure he hasn't got doppelganger? Are you sure he's not using a body double? Because, I mean, yesterday, I think he was in 3 different countries. Snake Island, I don't know if Snake Island was actually yesterday, but the video's coming out today. Just really kind of clear, strong leadership from this guy in almost a diametric opposition to Putin's style of leadership. And you've seen Putin recently try and kind of copy a bit of Zelensky with going out and meeting the people and selfies and whatnot. But he's just a mere, I don't know, mere wisp of a shadow of Zelensky in terms of that kind of strong PR leader. Right, going on to the front line, and in all honesty, I don't have that much information on the front line at the moment, and I don't think there is that much information coming out. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malia reported that Ukrainian troops have advanced up to 1 kilometer in the some areas south of Bakhmut. You keep hearing this 1.5 kilometers. Someone was saying yesterday that if you add up all of those 1.5 kilometers, they'd have Bakhmut completely surrounded by now. So I'm not sure that's true, but sometimes I wonder exactly where is that. Then, because they're vague, what that can often mean is suitably vague, right? But you get a 1 kilometer advance near Klishchivka on, say, one flank at Klishchivka, and then a 1.5. The next day it might be 1.5 kilometers to the slightly different axis there, and then another 1 kilometer advance on the other side of Klishchivka. So it looks like maybe 4 kilometers worth of advance, but that's not 4 on top of each other. That's just different areas around, say, Klishchivka, which is around Bakhmut. So I don't think this is a case of talking rubbish, but this is a case of lots and lots of different tiny areas of attack that themselves get gains, and those are hard fought for as well. Every tree line is really difficult to take. The Russians are putting up resistance. There are minefields, there's artillery, there are mortars, so on and so forth. But anyway, northern sector didn't see any changes. Northern Bakhmut sector. Russian troops are actually trapped in Bakhmut, says Malia. Our troops have made it as difficult as possible for the enemy to move and made it impossible for him to leave. Shelling continues from both sides. In the Bakhmut direction on the southern flank, there is advancement in several directions, more than a kilometer. So that's basically building on what I was just saying. As per Britain's intelligence report, Ukrainian forces made, quote, significant gains in a Bakhmut direction. I think that's just generally recently. The Russian soldiers are highly likely struggling with poor morale, a mix of disparate units, and a limited ability to find and strike Ukrainian artillery. It's good news for the Ukrainians there. If we go elsewhere, Ukraine continues efforts to gradually degrade Russian manpower and logistics assets, but operations have slowed down in some directions. For new attacks, Ukraine still needs certain Western weapons systems, says Zelensky. And part of the reason it might be slowing down is something like this. Now, I'm not going to show you this footage because it ends up, even from a distance, you can tell what goes on here. But here we have a Russian trench system, or Russian trench, that has been abandoned by the Russians. And you can see, I don't know if you can just about see there. Let's expand this just for a second or two. You can see Ukrainian troops advancing on that trench line there. They're walking down here. They basically run into this trench line, but it's been booby trapped, and those guys basically get blown up. And you see a number of injured people kind of crawl out and whatnot. This, to me, is a representation of how difficult it is on the front line and why Ukraine is, as far as some people are concerned, their advances are going slowly. It's because you can't just advance, take over a trench, move on to the next. It's not quick. You've got trench lines all over the place. You've got tree lines that hold trenches in and strongholds and strong points and whatnot. But yeah, if you're booby trapping trenches like that, then you can't even take over an enemy position easily. That then becomes a case of right, we're here now. We've got to clear that out. How long will it take to clear all the booby traps of a trench line? So that you're not rushing in, triggering off the booby traps, and the entire trench blowing up. I mean, the Ukraine. Andrew Perpetua is saying that he reckons a good third of the platoon was taken out here, and that makes it operationally, it can't do its job. It's basically that's that platoon out of it. Combat ineffective, I think, is the term I was looking for there. So yeah, that is making advances slow and difficult, and that's why things like cluster munitions would be super useful. You throw cluster munitions at that trench line, and you will trigger off those booby traps. Game over. That then allows you to continue advancing. And we'll get onto cluster munitions pretty much now, except I have a whole tab to deal with them because it's such a big subject. Right, the US security package, about $800 million worth, has been announced yesterday, and this is a really significant package. Right, Patriot air defense system missiles, AIM-7 missiles for air defense, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, additional ammunition for HIMARS, 31 155mm howitzers, so those would be towed howitzers, obviously super useful. 155mm artillery rounds, including cluster munitions, and 105mm artillery rounds that can be used in other things, possibly in the French light tanks, those wheeled tanks, or other pieces of kit. 32. So obviously, cluster munitions is huge. They not only need ammunition just in general, but cluster munitions are also particularly useful types of round, given the work they need to be doing. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. 32 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. That's brilliant. That'll be replacing attritional losses. 32 Striker APCs. Fantastic. So 64 vehicles, 31 howitzers, mine clearing equipment, tube launched, optically tracked, wire guided, so tow missiles that go on the Bradley, or they're the missiles for the Bradley systems, Javelin and other anti-armor systems and rockets, precision aerial munitions, that'd be things like Excalibur rounds, I would have thought, Penguin unmanned aerial systems, I don't know about them, but obviously some kind of drone, 27 tactical vehicles to recover equipment, 10 tactical vehicles to tow and haul equipment. They're obviously saying, right, we need way more ARVs, armored recovery vehicles, because our vehicles are getting hit during these offensive maneuvers, which is unsurprising, but I think they've been caught without enough of these ARVs, would be my guess, and they just need a lot more of them. Demolition and munitions, demolitions, munitions, and systems for obstacle clearing. That'd be things like MICLIC resources, and the systems itself. I don't know if that includes the vehicles, small arms, and over 28 million rounds of small arms ammunition and grenades, spare parts, and other field equipment. That is really, really significant package. And as I say every time, I am repeating myself, every time Ukraine get a package like this, what is Russia getting? And tumbleweed. Czechia to send Ukraine more attack helicopters and ammunition. Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala tweeted yesterday that his country would send Ukraine additional attack helicopters and hundreds of thousands of large caliber ammunition in the coming months. Czechia will also help Ukraine to train its pilots, including on F-16 fighter jets. The country will deliver flight simulators to enable Ukraine to conduct the training on its soil. Wow, not just in Western countries. According to PM Fiala, Czechia has supplied Ukraine with 676 pieces of heavy equipment and over 4 million ammunition rounds since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. I mean, well done, Czechia. That's insanely good. Germany has updated its, Oryx here updating their pledge to delivered list. This is one Brücken Legerpanzer Biber bridge layer, one Pioneer Panzer II-A1 DAX armored engineering vehicle. Those are pretty decent engineering vehicles. 6 HX-81 tank transporters, 2 anti-drone sensors and jammers, and 3 radio jammers. Nice, useful little list of stuff that's now been delivered, and I'm sure they'll be used by the Ukrainians straight away. Ukraine and Slovakia have signed a contract for the production of 16 Susanna 2 self-propelled howitzers, Zelensky reported during his visit to Slovakia. He was in Slovakia yesterday, amongst other European nations, and Turkey, if you include that as a European nation. German lawmaker Markus Faber lobbied for Leopard 2 tanks for Ukraine. Today, he got to see them at the front. Brigades, quote, are happy and grateful for our training and help. 2 tanks were damaged, but the crew survived. They would have been killed in a Soviet tanks, Faber said. Germany has transferred 18 out of 328 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Much more are needed to make the difference on the 1,300-kilometer front, Faber tells Scholz. So you hope that, the usefulness of this is this guy then goes back to Scholz and says he's spoken to the people on the front. It's been a photo op, but he's seen what they need and seen the happiness and of the Ukrainian soldiers, crew members, and whatnot. And he goes back and says, Scholz, puts pressure on Scholz to deliver more. So this kind of thing is super, super useful. UK is providing Ukraine with 15 rapid intervention vehicles and 2 major foam vehicles to bolster Ukraine's firefighting capability. Those aren't vehicles made out of foam. That would be ridiculous. These are vehicles that can fire foam, obviously firefighting vehicles. So that's really useful. Or the whole range of equipment is needed, right? From military to non-military. And to continue, we have Turkey saying they will continue to provide Ukraine with all kinds of support. So Erdogan has said that during Zelensky's visit, and there was a lot that came out of that. We'll come on to some of this, but we're going to continue on the subject of Turkey with regard to help. And we're moving on to our cluster munitions section here. Now, for your information, says Michael Weiss, he's a great journalist for Yahoo News. Turkey sent Ukraine cluster munitions as early as November 2022. I understand everyone has just discovered this subject matter in the last 24 hours, but this isn't a wholly nuanced provision from a NATO country. So people like kicking off about the US providing cluster munitions. Ukraine has been using cluster munitions, just not a huge amount of them, since November when Turkey started giving them cluster munitions as a NATO member state. So, get the proper context here. This isn't a new moral scenario. The decision to transfer cluster munitions to Ukraine was made because both Kyiv and Washington were running out of conventional shells, Joe Biden said in an interview with CNN. So this is really important. It's one, saying that US didn't have enough shells, really. And 2, obviously Ukraine didn't. So this solves the shell problem. This is exactly what I've said previously. A number of analysts have said previously that this solves the shell problem. It's not so much about them being cluster munitions, is that they just need shells. But them being cluster munitions is also beneficial in terms of the way that they can be utilized. So it was a very difficult decision on my part, says Biden. And by the way, I've discussed this with our allies. I've discussed this with our friends. We are in a situation where Ukraine is being brutally attacked. This is one reason. The second is that Ukrainians are running out of ammunition for 155mm howitzers. This is an ammunition war, and they're running out of this ammunition, and we have a little of it. And I accepted the recommendation of the Ministry of Defense, not on a permanent basis, but temporarily during the transition period while we receive more 155mm weapons, these shells for the Ukrainians. So this is a case that some people are saying, I think Andrew Perpetua is saying in his live stream that the production levels will be up to where they need to be in November of this year. So in November this year, the Allies will be able to provide Ukraine with enough ammunition, shells, enough artillery shells for their needs, right? But in the meantime, in this transition period, with stockpiles low, these DPICMs will do the job. The cluster munitions will stop that gap, and there you go. I mean, that's Biden's position there. It might not be a long-term thing. You can imagine, however, that once you break, it's like that red line. It's been crossed now, isn't it? Once the cluster munitions are being supplied, you can imagine in November it won't be a case of like, no, we're going to stop giving cluster munitions now and just give regular shells, high explosive shells and whatnot. I could imagine by that stage everyone would be fairly used to it. And for those complaining, like Russians and Russian shills, and Putin himself, uh, the Russian ambassador to Washington, Anatoly Antonov, said that the supply of cluster munitions is a gesture of desperation by the US. But this is footage that I've shown you before. I mean, this is from the beginning of the war, where Russia absolutely pummeled Kharkiv with cluster munitions. So don't give me any of this nonsense, Russia. It absolutely, I want to swear, it really, really annoys me. And anyone who is repeating that kind of Russian narrative, or is being anti-cluster munitions, plays into the Russian narrative. Yeah, cluster munitions are horrible, but they've been used widely by the Russians on civilians, and I didn't see those people say anything then. And as well as that, they are something that Ukraine desperately needs, and I think will use in a way that is not symmetrical to how the Russians use them. So, just it annoys me so much. And in fact, this was just a really retributive move by the Russians. So what happened in Kharkiv is the Russians were expecting to take it, and the resistance was put up by Kharkiv. And as a kind of like fu to Kharkiv, they just hammered it afterwards. So the ground forces pulled back, and then they just like, oh, I can't believe you guys effectively beat us in Kharkiv, and they just hammered it with like grads and cluster munitions. Just absolutely disgusting. That was a year ago, right? Where are all the people up in arms about that? Yes, there was a general sense of disgust in the Russian invasion, but I don't see those people being disgusted about the use of cluster munitions. I can't remember seeing much of that talk then. Russia has been showering Ukrainian cities with cluster munitions that have dud rates of upwards of 30%, meaning that 30% plus of the bomblets remain unexploded and dangerous. It's very, very upset about the US supplying Ukraine with cluster munitions that have a dud rate below 2.35%. So Russia's cluster munitions apparently had a dud rate that was some 15 times higher than the munitions that are being supplied to Ukraine by the US. Absolutely, it's just chalk and cheese. These are the cluster munitions that Russia have been firing at Ukraine's second largest city for 16 months, hitting mostly civilians, and that's that footage I showed you before. It's just, Austria opposes the supply of cluster munitions to Ukraine as it poses a long-term threat to the civilian population. Well, go and deal, Austria, with that kind of footage. What do you think about that? I'm getting into rant mode here, but it's just like, oh. Ukraine has pledged, and then add to this, Ukraine has pledged not to use cluster munitions in residential areas. Not like the Russians there. Indeed, we can expand that somewhat, because Ukraine will report to partners on the use of these munitions and their effectiveness. In fact, let's go into more detail. Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov explained that Ukraine will use US cluster munitions. They will not be used in the territory of the Russian Federation, only for the deoccupation of internationally recognized Ukrainian territories. Ammunition will be used only in places where the Russian military gathers, and it will keep strict records of the use of these weapons and the local areas where they'll be used. After liberation, these areas will be prioritized for demining. I mean, you can't say better than that, really. Yes, these are horrible things. We're going to use them. Russia's used them, and I don't see their commitment to demining these areas and using them and being accountable for their use, and not using them in certain ways, but other ways. We're going to do that, say the Ukrainians, and we're going to keep records, and hopefully, that will keep some of these critics at least somewhat happier. Ukraine's offensive, says Rob Lee, will likely ultimately culminate due to attrition or ammunition expenditure. By tapping into the DPICM stockpile, Ukraine may be able to continue its offensive for longer than otherwise. It could also affect how Ukraine conducts the rest of its offensive. I mean, this is really important, and it has some really big ramifications with regard to the counteroffensive that's now taking place. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff, staying on Turkey. Ending a busy day in Turkey. This is Zelensky, negotiations with President Erdogan, coordination on positions of the peace formula, the NATO summit, security guarantees, and a grain initiative. Turkey's an important player in that grain initiative, and the negotiations that take place concerning it. Reconstruction of Ukraine, defense contracts between our enterprises, says Zelensky. So a lot of work, a lot of political work being done in Turkey with Erdogan. Erdogan is a super important player here, kind of straddles the fence a little bit between Russia and Ukraine. Yes, takes money in from Russia. Yes, takes an awful lot of Russian tourists in, and also helps the Ukrainians. So kind of the best of both worlds for Erdogan, but certainly somebody being a NATO member is a country that Ukraine definitely want to get on their side as much as possible. Zelensky visits Turkey for the first time since Russia's invasion, says Erdogan. Told him, Ukraine has earned the right to NATO candidacy. That is massive. So this is Erdogan. So Erdogan must know that he's in a really powerful position with regard to Putin, right? So he can say openly to Zelensky, you guys have earned your right to be in NATO. We're a NATO member. You guys should be in NATO, which is an absolute fu to Putin. But Putin can't do anything about that because Putin needs Turkey. So this is just one of these wonderfully strong positions. I mean, ideally, Erdogan would be not having anything to do with Russia, right? So I'm not actually saying well done to Erdogan, but I am saying that he's, as far as he's concerned, in his own sort of power politics and his own country, he is straddling that fence quite successfully. He's like, yes, I'll have all your money, Russia. Yes, yes, and you can butter me up. And yes, I'm going to say that screw you, Russia, because Zelensky and Ukraine should be in NATO. And here you go, Zelensky. Here are cluster munitions, and here are some long-range missile systems. Blah blah blah, Cobra 2s, and all this kind of kit I'm giving you. And there's nothing you can say, Putin. But yeah, all your money can come here, and we can launder it. That's not a problem. So that's kind of what's going on there. So Erdogan reiterates call for peace talks with Russia and says he spoke about additional prisoner swaps with Putin, who will visit Turkey next month. Whoa, that's going to be interesting. So this is super important. And actually, I think he's chosen his words really. In fact, I've got goosebumps really bloody well here. So, and I'm not someone who heaps praise on Erdogan. Like I detest him as a kind of quasi-authoritarian dictator. And I want to emphasize once again, in your presence, so this is Erdogan to Zelensky, no one will lose from the coming of a just peace. Now, concentrate on the word just there. This isn't appeasement. This isn't like we need to get to the negotiation table and Russia can have Crimea and you can. He's saying everyone will benefit from a just peace, and a just peace is a peace where everyone gets a just desserts, where it is fair. In other words, that's really, he's saying that once you get Crimea back in the Donbass, everyone will benefit from this. And Russia, who are getting screwed over, will certainly benefit, although they might not say they will. That's how I read that. And I think that's a very well chosen phrase from Erdogan. However, he's also closed the door on Sweden's NATO bid. We do not support those who embrace terrorists, he said. So, and the whole burning Quran episode, or 2 episodes, might well have been the first one was certainly, and the second one might well have been sort of funded and organised by Russia. This is a real shame that he said that. Now, staying on NATO, Stoltenberg has said that the Vilnius summit will agree on a 3-part package to bring Ukraine closer to NATO. The package will include a multi-year support program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and NATO, according to him. Allies will also establish a NATO-Ukraine Council to upgrade political ties, as well as reaffirm that Ukraine will become a NATO member. Stoltenberg also told reporters that Zelensky would join the inaugural meeting of the new council, adding that he looks forward to welcoming the Ukrainian leader at the summit. He didn't specify, though, whether Zelensky would attend in person or online. And I think that's basically as good as you're going to get. He's not going to be able to join, or Ukraine aren't going to be able to join whilst in a full-scale war with the enemy of NATO, right? Because otherwise that would kind of invoke Article 5 straight away, and then it's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But this is basically your next best thing. Uh, Zelensky also went to Slovakia yesterday, and look, another opportunity to show his humanity in a way that Putin just can't. I wouldn't see Putin fist bumping anyone or talking about ACDC and Guns N' Roses. Anyway, he then said this, Zelensky, during a press conference, um, which is absolutely on point. And I think he's saying more of this kind of stuff. He probably does, and we just don't hear about it all the time. But this is absolutely on point. I was just wondering, he says, uh, in public very loudly, I don't fully understand where this is coming from. The pro-Russian position. Have you ever seen people from the United States move to Russia? Have you ever seen people from Europe wanting to emigrate to Russia? Have you ever seen them get out of European cars and get into Soviet Union cars? Just a really, really good point. I've never seen such a thing. Not once in my life. I, I've never seen that, not once in my life. So sorry. Oh, my fingers are just absolutely rubbish today. Anyway, yeah, I've never seen that once in my life. So, um, just really good rhetoric there, and it's a really good point. The only people you see uh, going to Russia are enemies of the state type thing. People who are either getting paid by Russia or have done something that the American government really don't like. Otherwise, no one willingly goes there. It's one-way traffic. When Poland and Eastern European countries came out of the sort of Warsaw Pact era type association with Russia, what was the first thing they did? Join NATO. It ran to the West. And that's got to tell you something. Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia presidents wrote a letter to NATO Secretary General and NATO heads warning them about the threat posed by Russia's aggressive actions and the evolving situation in Belarus. That's something I might dip into in an extra video. Worried about Belarus and its positioning and becoming a vassal state of Russia. Zelensky, went to Slovakia, is supposed to be earlier. Important meetings in Bratislava with President Zuzana Chaputova and the Prime Minister. Together with our reliable neighbour, we will talk about defence support, Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, the upcoming NATO summit, and energy security. And remember, they've done a deal on the Zuzana self-propelled howitzers as well. Now, this is an interesting infographic, and there's two of these. Russian defence companies responsible for crafting Zala and Lancet drones continue to operate without restrictions in the US and the European Union. So you look at this and go, right, so the Zala and Lancet drones, yeah, of course, Ukraine has put sanctions in place. Great Britain has put sanctions in place on most of these drone manufacturers. USA not on the Zala and Lancet, and the EU on a couple there. You might think, oh, the Great Britain comes out well here. We're doing a good job of sanctioning. Uh, don't hold your breath, because this next one ain't looking good. So Novator Design Bureau, producer of caliber cruise missiles, has evaded US and UK sanctions. Design Bureau for special machine building manufacturing equipment for sea-based cruise missiles and ballistic missiles are not sanctioned by the EU and UK. In fact, the UK is doing terribly for sanctioning Russian missile armaments companies. There's not one of these missiles where we are sanctioning, as according to this research. Now, the USA fares a little bit better, EU a little bit better. Obviously, Ukraine is sanctioning blooming everyone in Russia. It's basically sanctioned Russia. But the UK needs to pull their fingers out their backsides. That is a serious lack of sanctioning. And I thought we were pretty good on sanctions. But, I can't verify this research, but I'm sure it's pretty kosher. Finally, and talking about exactly what Zelensky was saying in that speech, I don't see anyone get into Soviet cars. Well, they're not really making Soviet cars at the moment. Here's an interesting observation. Chinese cars are popping up all over Moscow. All the ride-sharing apps seem to have bought a load of Haval, Chery, and Exceed. I've never heard of these manufacturers before 2022, but now you can't go 5 minutes without seeing one. So when China is doing these deals with Russia, like access to Vladivostok port on the eastern seaboard of Russia, then what's happening? What are what are the concessions being made? What's happening behind closed doors? Well, it seems like there are a lot of deals whereby China gets to pump in loads of products to Russia. And of course, this just then makes Russia even more beholden to China. It's just another example of how it's a kind of vassal state of China. Great decision to invade, Putin. You've really strengthened your country, haven't you? Anyway, that's today's news piece. Sorry, it's gone on rather a long time, but it always does, doesn't it? Sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I really appreciate your support. One of my twins has a football tournament this afternoon, so my extra is something I recorded yesterday. It's kind of a book club. I've got a book called The Bomber Mafia that my mate bought for me, by Malcolm Gladwell, and it's to do with the Second World War. But actually, I was reading some passages from it, going, "Oh my god, I've got to share this with the team because this is so pertinent to the Ukraine-Russia war." So I do a bit of reading from there and talking about elements picked out from that book. So that's the extra today, and then it'll be a sort of regular one tomorrow. Anyway, take care. Speak to you soon.